You're listening to Seattle Real Estate Podcast.
So Washington State, Seattle, King County, we got some of the craziest COVID stuff still going. We're still wearing masks inside. Still got these vax, man. Just craziness. But one of the things that's been enduring, and it's been enduring throughout the United States in certain areas, has been the eviction moratorium. No, if you were impacted due to COVID way back in March of 2020, you're still able to not pay rent in 2022, 2 years later, if you can, prove that you were impacted by, back in 2020. The deal I have with that is that there's a lot of work to be had out there. If you can't figure out how to get a job and pay for the rent in a 2-year process, what have you been doing? Now, I know people have, things that come up. They have medical issues, all kinds of stuff. But there have been literally billions of dollars of aid going to tenants to get caught up on their back rent. And you've got these eviction moratoriums where homeowners can't do what they need to be doing with their individual properties. Never in our history have we done something as broad scoped as this. And, we're just going to have all the homeowners pay. And the tenants, they're not capable of anything. So we're just not going to require them to pay rent. So the eviction moratorium here in Seattle, it was set to end, I think, on February the 18th last week, and it got extended out another couple of weeks till March 1st, I believe. And then our, socialist alternative member of the Seattle City Council, Kshama Sawant, she's coming up with an alternative that kicks out the eviction moratorium until whenever this emergency is deemed no longer an emergency. So this drives me crazy. It's like, okay, the timeline is such that if you can't figure out what to do with your housing scenario by now, what have you been doing? So I don't believe there's any reason the eviction moratorium should be extended out. What happened on a national basis, when we were told, 11 million Americans are all going to lose their homes at once. Now, that was like 11 million Americans that were maybe a little behind on rent. Did they all get kicked to the curb? Have you been seeing news story after news story on here and in other forms of media? Because if it bleeds, it'll lead. And so if tons of people get kicked to the curb because of these eviction moratoriums ending, you'll see it in the news. Have you seen any of those? No, you haven't. How come? Because it hasn't been a large scale story. It hasn't happened. You haven't had unusually large numbers of people getting evicted and getting kicked to the curb and being homeless. That just hasn't happened. And yet you've got politicians on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., sleeping on the steps saying, if we don't get these eviction moratoriums extended out, there's going to be this mass drama. Those came and went. What happened? Kind of business as usual. You're always going to have a certain percentage of people who are going to be evicted for whatever reason, whatever circumstance. Now, you did have a lot of people who lost their jobs at the beginning of the pandemic. What's the job market been like? Say the last, 18 months. What's that been like? Has there been a shortage or has there been massive demand? Either one of those things? Yes. There's been a shortage and a demand, right? So, and wages have been rising. On top of just about everything else in the world going up, right? I looked at gas the other day here in Seattle. It's getting up close to $5 a gallon. I know that's nothing compared to those of you in California, but here I was like, damn, that's expensive. And when some gas stations you go to and they tap you out at $100 and you're like, I'm not even close. Why is the pump slowing down? I'm not even that close to filling up and the pump's slowing. What's the deal? Oh, getting close to $100. Oh, my $100 just doesn't really go all that far anymore. But I digress. Let's get back to the whole rent thing. I'm at a point now where I'm like, you know what? Let's just keep these eviction moratoriums in place forever, and we'll just see what happens to the supply of rental housing. No, let's just do a little social experiment, because that's essentially what we're doing right now, right? We're just seeing what happens when one group of people continues to sometimes not pay, and the other group has to pay for all of the expenses. Because not only are they dependent upon the landlords are not only dependent on the tenants' income to pay things like mortgages, but you've got insurance, you've got maintenance, you've got utilities. Oftentimes you got all kinds of stuff. But here in Seattle, we've got just this crazy, crazy city council. But even some of the other members of city council aren't really in agreement with the extension on this one. It's kind of like, halfway through on that defund the police thing, where we started to kind of work through that. And by we, I mean the people who kind of were really on board with it. And after a while, they're like, yeah, maybe this isn't such a good idea. And that's what I think a number of the members on our Seattle City Council they're positioning themselves at right now. A vote on this resolution that Kshama Sawant has brought forward that basically kicks out the eviction moratorium to who knows when. But let's just call it forever. Let's call it forever. It's so ridiculous. You have literally constricted the amount of rental housing in Seattle by what you've done here. And I've been talking for, I don't know, a year, 6 months about how rents are going through the roof. They will be going through the roof. What's happened with rents? Have they gone down? Have they, decreased? Are things getting cheaper for people who need to rent because they can't find a damn house because we have such a shortage of housing? That's a real thing going on right now. I am on the daily dealing with people. Last Friday, I dealt with a situation where a guy just emails me, hey, found you on the interweb. I've got a house that I listed for XYZ. Let's call it 1.35. We escalated up to, let's call it 1.65. Those are not actual numbers. They're close. And the appraisal came back at 1.45. And the homeowner is like, what do I do? Obviously, there's multiple offers. And you're a couple $100,000 shy on the appraisal. And this individual didn't have the cash to bring up make up the difference between 145 and 165. So we ran the numbers, but those are situations that are happening every single day. And so there are people who really want to buy a home. And this guy had indicated he has made offers. He knew all the comparable sales, or he knew enough of them to have a good handle on the market. He was like, yeah, we looked at that one. We didn't get that one. We made an offer on this one. We didn't get that one. So, this is a guy that's fully vested in buying a home. And he was like, didn't know if he's going to be able to put this deal together. He's the homeowner. And so we kind of worked through what he should be doing. I told him that a rebuttal probably wasn't going to work with the existing appraiser. Maybe he needs to look at another lender. He needs to have his mortgage broker, whomever he's got handling that. Maybe go a different direction lending-wise, because then you can pull the trigger on a new appraisal. Maybe he gets lucky, and I think there was room to go up maybe another $100,000, not to get it to the 165, but maybe the 155 mark. But my whole point of it is that is going on every single day. These are people who can buy. They are scrapping at buying. Oftentimes, they can't get a hold of a deal, and so they rent. And they've got money behind them. So they're going to pay top dollar for rent. So what happens to somebody who can't afford a house and is forced to rent? They're going to be in that rental pool if they want to live here in Seattle forever. And as this is going on, you've got a Seattle City Council that has, and just the city in general, had this eviction moratorium. And that's the flip side is people don't want to be landlords in Seattle. Appreciation rate in Seattle is less than in the suburbs, for a number of different reasons. But one of them is because you've got these crazy restrictions on what you can do with your property inside the city limits. I mean, the restrictions on what you can and can't say to people as far as renting out your home are incredible. It's incredible. And that's just where we sit as a city in our infinite wisdom. And so my whole contention this entire time has been these eviction moratoriums are really going to wipe out the tenants in the state of Washington, specifically in Seattle. And that's what's going on right now is you've got rents going through the absolute roof, which you've got in other areas. But because you're forever shrinking the supply here in Seattle, That's putting out fire with gasoline, one of my favorite David Bowie songs. That's literally what's happening. You can't put out fire with gasoline. That's not going to work. It's just going to blow up, right? So that is literally these things that the politicians are coming up with. Well, this seems like a good idea. Instead of ripping that Band-Aid off and going, okay, well, maybe we need to get some more funding together for these tenants who are in trouble because after 2 years, they couldn't figure it out or get it together. Maybe we need to look at that and get back to normal, where we give the landlords the ability to do an eviction if they haven't been paid, because they've been on the hook sometimes they've been on the hook for a couple of years. And I don't know about you, but when you try and hold together, a number of homes, when you've got no income coming in and you got huge expenses going out, that is not a tenable situation. And that's what's happening. So one of my big things is, well, why don't you just kick out the eviction moratoriums forever and we'll just see what happens there? Because when rents go even higher in Seattle than they do in other cities, then we'll be able to kind of go, well, yeah, okay, but here's why that happened. Here's where that started to happen. And there will be a direct correlation, but nobody's going to want to admit to it. They're going to be like, well, yeah, affordable housing is a right for everybody and we should all have it. Okay. Yeah, but you are literally artificially restricting the supply of housing for people to rent, because no landlord in his right mind wants to have a property where if you tell them, well, there might be a couple year period where you're not going to be able to collect any rent, but I hate to tell you this, you're going to have to cover all the expenses, and you might have a tenant in that property who tears your property apart, and you can't really do much about it because it's basically city resolution. What smart landlord that's worked hard, got together the money for the down payment, qualified, had good credit for this property, bought the property? What landlord in their right mind is going to go, yeah, give me 3 of those. Give me 3 of those properties. I want that. None. It's just not going to happen. It's going the other way. We meet with sellers all the time who are like, yeah, I'm thinking about getting out of Seattle. Am I right? Yep, that is not a new theme. Heard that so many times. And then you've got a property that used to be a rental property that gets sold. And who does it go to? It goes to an owner-occupied. Individual, because unless you put down a massive down payment in Seattle now, the numbers don't crunch, right? The numbers don't crunch as much as they used to. You can say that about a lot of cities, but the numbers don't crunch. So you've got that. You've got fewer people wanting to buy here. And I know there was a stat that came out that I think 18.5% of all purchases happening across the United States are happening from institutional investors. 1 in 5 sales. And I looked at the markets where that's happening. Yep. And those markets make sense. It's not Seattle, because you're not having institutional investors come through here for various reasons. One of them being you've got this eviction moratorium idea that, so many people are going to be, kicked to the curb and evicted, and it's going to impact people of color. We've got all of these statements that have been, said since the beginning of the pandemic. And on a national level, when that did happen, when these eviction moratoriums were taken off, President Biden went to the CDC and said, hey, can you slap one on there? And Supreme Court said, yeah, not so much. Not so much. You don't really have the authority to do that. So here in Seattle, even though we've got this eviction moratorium that's supposed to end on March 1st, we've got a city council that is voting right now on whether this should move forward or not. I bet you it doesn't move forward. That's kind of my bottom line here. I don't think it'll move forward because, like I said about the whole defund the police thing, we're at that point where people are like, you know what? Maybe this isn't the greatest idea or concept in the world. Maybe there's some drawbacks and there's some hang-ups with this, and maybe it's just time to move on to reality and, get a little further down the road. And that's exactly what we saw happen with the defund. We saw people just at the beginning, really getting after it. They were all engaged with the whole protest deal, and that happened. And then we got to boots on the ground. All right. Yeah, not enough police officers, and they're quitting in record numbers, and crime has gone up, and while crime has gone up, Our communities are being impacted. You've got that whole thing going on. Well, I think even council people here in Seattle are recognizing, you know what? It's probably time to pull that Band-Aid off and go. Even when the eviction moratorium comes off, there will still be another 6-month period here in city of Seattle where you can't physically kick people out, but you can be all lined up and go. It's craziness. It's craziness. You're going to end up with no rental housing at all. Who's going to want to rent here? I don't know. Just go a few miles to the burbs where I'm sitting and do it there. Granted, it's probably going to be more expensive. But when it comes time to being able to enforce, I don't know, your lease, what good is a lease if it's not enforceable? No good to me. No good to me. What good is having a property that's appreciating at a decent clip when you could spend a little bit more money, go to the burbs, be able to do what you want, and have way better appreciation? Well, that's literally what's going on right now in the city of Seattle. So there's that. Okay, so I'm going to read, I had a question. I've had a bunch of questions that I think are good questions from people. So along these lines, there are professionals and scientists saying that the pandemic and the results of the pandemic, meaning we had a vaccine get created, that's going to lead to large numbers of people leaving the earth. And I'm not talking about space travel. Just they will no longer be with us. They will no longer be here because of, you get what I'm saying, right? So that is a scenario that some people are putting out there. And I'm being very careful with words now because this is the kind of stuff that qualifies for, you know what, and then all of a sudden, where'd my channel go? What happened to it? I lost it. It's gone. No, you don't lose it. It's gone. So what happens? Here's the bottom line. What happens if a whole bunch of people are no longer here on Earth to make their mortgage payments? What happens to all of those homes? Legit question, no matter whether it comes from whatever you think might happen or whatever you've got going on. What happens if a large number of people could no longer make their payments? All right, well, let's work that through. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but we're going to go through the scenario here. All right, some of them probably own the homes free and clear. So then they would just pass on to their heirs, right? Hopefully they have a will. They're not Prince where he leaves, he's intestate, meaning he doesn't leave a will. And the state basically has to figure it out through a bunch of legal processes. And he had like 11 siblings to fight over, 2 of which have died before they can figure out the will. So do a will. That's the bottom line. Even if you think you don't have any money, even if you think, well, got nobody to leave it to, do a will and take care of whatever possessions you do have, because it's such a nightmare on the other end if you're dealing with that and the person dies intestate. So you're going to have some people that are going to will their properties to their kids. Their kids are going to get it. Now, what if they've got a mortgage on it? All right. Here's what I think will happen is that the vast majority of people in this market right now today, the market is going up so hard that there will be some equity or enough equity. If the heirs inherit the property, they will be able to sell it and cover the mortgage and whatever expenses. So they're going to be able to get out okay. Whereas during the Great Recession, the market was going downward, meaning every month you had less and less equity in the home. Maybe you have negative equity. And as the market continued to dive, your negative equity would increase because the market kept going down. In that scenario, then you've got the Great Recession, right? Lots of people putting their homes back on the market, giving up on them. That was the short sale phenomena, right? So in today's market, if you have a whole bunch of people all of a sudden gone, I think the market covers all those homes coming on the market. Maybe it stabilizes the market a little bit, but this is a situation that if that did happen, there would be some massive ramifications, I think, to the general marketplace. And we'd have a lot of people going, wow, that was a lot of people that left us in a rather short, abrupt, point in time. And so real estate probably wouldn't be the biggest of the concerns, but it's a legit question, right? What happens if a whole bunch of people pass away and what happens to their homes? Well, same thing as if they died of old age. When they pass away, something goes on with the house. Hopefully they had a will, leave it to whomever. So yeah, that is basically in a nutshell what would happen. And this market has so much demand in it right now that it could take a big whack of supply and it would just gobble it up. It would just gobble it up because there are so many people out there that are looking to buy a home that can't. Like I talked about, people that are, looking to be homeowners that can't, they're going to rent. So they're putting pressure on those who can't afford to buy because that supply of housing, that rental supply of housing is small already. And in markets like Seattle, you're constricting it further. What do you think will happen with those prices? These are kind of no-brainer, statements, right? So what happens if you have a whole bunch of people all at once leave the earth and they leave their homes behind because you can't take it with you, right? So they did that. I think at this point in time, right now, today, and that was the question, those homes get absorbed and the appreciation would probably drop, the rate of appreciation, because all of a sudden now you are bringing in some supply to the marketplace. Now, how many people are we talking? I don't know. I don't follow the theories of this many people are probably not going to be with us due to vaccines or whatever. I don't really follow those storylines. And so from that standpoint, is it millions? I'm not sure. And if we did have millions, well, then real estate's probably going to be the least of our worries. But it would just go through the same thing that would happen as if somebody died of old age or, whatever, got in a car wreck, didn't make it, shooting, who knows, whatever. But that stuff does come up. You hate to say it, but we've had homes that we've had to sell. And, I remember going into a home in the basement or one of my appraisers had it happen to them. It's happened so long ago that I can't remember. Maybe I was there as a senior appraiser. You go into the basement and the real estate agent goes, "Hey, see that nail over there in the header? Yeah, that's where the rope was where the guy, hung himself." And you're like, "Oh, that's great. So that's why this home is being sold." Yep. Yeah. And you're like, "Oh, that's horrible. Horrible." So, yeah, stuff happens. And great question. What would happen if, had a lot of people? So my guess is right now the market is strong enough with demand that it would cover all that inventory. If you had, way more than that, then you're going to have a supply issue, an oversupply. Prices will come down and then they will stabilize out at some point in time when all of that supply has been absorbed by the marketplace. So you're talking about a number of people need to buy, number of people that want a home versus how many homes there are on the market. And right now you've got such a significant shortfall and we are going into our busy time of the year. This is our busy time of the year and the market is already 100% sold out. That's where we're at here in Seattle anyway. And I know it's that way across a lot of markets in the United States as well. So that's literally what you've got going on. So I hope that answered your question and who the person who asked this question. I will let you know that I answered the question on the Seattle Eviction Moratorium gets extended out by ridiculous socialist alternative city councilman. How's that for the title of a podcast? Okay. That's probably literally what it'll be. All right. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks so much for being part of the Seattle Real Estate Podcast, which if you follow daily, we are going to have some major changes. And we'll be doing those soon. So thanks again for being here. We'll catch up soon. Bye for now.